October 4th, 2025, Interstate 80 westbound, Center County, Pennsylvania. 5:30 in the evening, daylight still holding over the ridges. A retired civil engineer is driving home in his Dodge Ram at 77 miles an hour, an Air Force veteran, a hunter with more than 50 years in the woods. The kind of man who has identified every animal Pennsylvania has to offer, at distance, in bad light, in motion. About 165 yards ahead of him rolls a Subaru Crosstrek, and then something steps out of the tree line and crosses 4 lanes of interstate directly in front of that Subaru. For half a second, he assumes it's a man. Then he knows it isn't. It is completely dark, all one uniform color from head to foot. But it isn't the size that gets to him, it's the motion. He would later tell investigators, "It was the way it moved across the road that shook me. Not running, nothing quick or jerky, nothing like a sprinter, fast but smooth, a glide. It crosses all 4 lanes in seconds and vanishes into the trees on the far side." And then comes a part of this story that nobody has ever been able to explain. The people in the Subaru, the closest vehicle, the ones who must have seen it better than anyone alive, never came forward. The engineer followed them off the next exit just to ask one question. He pulled in behind them at a red light, stepped out of his truck. And the instant the light turned green, the Subaru sped away. Not a word. To this day, no one knows who they were, or what they saw through that windshield that made them run from a man who only wanted to compare notes. That is the strangest Bigfoot report of the past year. It is nowhere close to the most terrifying. Because something has been happening across this continent over the last 15 months, a wave of encounters stacking up faster than investigators can process them. 10 teenagers in the Idaho mountains, 4 of them seeing the same thing on separate nights. A Class A report out of the Louisiana swamps. A roadside sighting in Skamania County, Washington, the symbolic capital of Sasquatch country. 8 reports in 5 days in Ohio. I'm Alex, and I have been covering the subject long enough to tell you that veteran researchers are reaching for a word right now that they normally avoid. They're calling 2026 an acceleration. Tonight we're going through the most frightening of these cases, the ones that went wrong, because most encounters with these animals follow a quiet script. A figure at a distance, a glimpse, gone before the witness exhales. The cases in this video broke that script. These are the reports where the witness was watched, followed, warned, where stones came out of the dark and landed inches from sleeping children, where something held its ground instead of melting into the trees. Every case tonight is anchored to a real place, a real date, and a documented report. And when you line them up on a map, a pattern emerges that I honestly did not expect to find. Something out there is getting bolder. The question we have to answer is why? Part 1, the highway and the hollow. Let's go back to the beginning, back to Center County, Pennsylvania, because that highway crossing is only 1/3 of the story. The forested hills around State College are hiding 2 more reports, all logged within roughly 25 miles of one another, all within 6 years. 3 sightings, 1 tight circle of Appalachian Ridge country. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, the BFRO, the largest investigative database of its kind, operating since 1995, investigated all 3, and the descriptions line up. A quick word on how that database works, because it is the measuring stick for everything tonight. The BFRO sorts reports into classes. Class B covers sounds, distant shapes, possible misidentifications, honest reports with room for doubt built in. Class A is reserved for clear observations under conditions where mistaken identity essentially falls apart. Decent light, close range, a sustained look. Most reports never earn that letter. Several of the cases in this video did. That does not make them proof. It makes them the hardest cases in the country to wave away, which is exactly why we are starting here. Start with the man on the interstate, because his credibility is the spine of this case. A retired civil engineer, an Air Force veteran, more than 5 decades of hunting experience. He told investigators he had never believed in Bigfoot, never gave the subject a serious thought in his life. He was driving home from a trip with his wife when the figure crossed the 80 near mile marker 169, and his wife, looking out a different window of the truck, turned in time to catch only the empty road after it was gone. One moment, one angle. That's all the difference between seeing it and never knowing it was there. Now think about what that figure actually did. It crossed 4 lanes of interstate traffic in daylight, ahead of multiple vehicles with that smooth gliding stride, and was gone into the far tree line before a single driver could so much as touch the brakes. The witness was rattled enough to chase down the only other people who must have seen it, and they fled from him. I keep coming back to that red light. A 60-something retired engineer standing on the asphalt at an exit ramp, watching a Subaru accelerate away from a simple question. When the BFRO investigated, they judged the man sincere and very credible. And here's the detail that convinces me he wasn't chasing attention. When investigators asked for help reconstructing the scene, he drove more than 100 miles back to the site on his own time, at his own expense, just to add accuracy to the record. People who invent stories do not do that. People who are desperate for an explanation do. But the I-80 crossing is the tame chapter of the Center County file. 20 miles away, near State Game Lands 333 and a famous stretch of trout water locals called Fisherman's Paradise, a Penn State student had the encounter that still makes my skin crawl because his didn't last seconds. His unfolded across 2 separate nights, and it escalated. February 19th, 2025. 6:30 in the evening, already full dark in the woods. The student is out raccoon hunting, working through the timber with a flashlight and a predator call, a device that imitates a wounded animal to pull predators in close. Hold on to that detail. It matters more than anything else in this case. He plays the call, and almost immediately, a feeling settles over him that he could only describe to investigators as dreadful. Not nerves, dread. The full-body alarm that experienced hunters learn never to ignore. He decides to get out. On his way back toward the car, he stops with his back to a creek and sweeps the flashlight across the tree line, and the beam clips a black silhouette. In the instant, it slides into the brush. Big, upright, gone the moment the light touches it. He leaves those woods at speed. Most people would never have gone back. He went back. And the second night is what turned this from a sighting into a pursuit. Deep in the same woods, a single loud knock rings out. Wood striking wood, the signal sound that has been reported around these animals for the better part of a century. Then movement starts in the brush beside him. Not random animal movement, pacing, matching him step for step, staying just outside the reach of his light. He swings the flashlight again and again and catches nothing but branches until the beam lands square on a face. 40 yards away, looking directly at him. He ran. He was on the phone with a friend as he went, voice shaking, the movement still tracking him somewhere out in the dark. He made it to his car, and when the BFRO laid his account alongside the I-80 crossing and a third Center County report from 2019, the descriptions aligned across all 3. Dark, massive, upright, and utterly silent on its feet. 3 separate witnesses, 6 years, 25 miles. Sit with that geography for a moment. 3 reports inside a circle a healthy animal could walk across in a day or 2, spread over 6 years, from witnesses who almost certainly never met. The 2019 case predates the other two entirely, meaning whatever is being seen in those hollows was being seen there before the student ever played his call, before the engineer ever merged onto I-80. This isn't a creature passing through. By every indication in the record, it's a resident. And it has neighbors who have no idea. And spare a thought for the engineer's wife, one window away from the strangest sight of her husband's life, and she caught nothing but empty asphalt. I'd argue she might be the most important person in this case because she's all of us. How many of these things have crossed a road 30 seconds before we rounded the bend? How many were standing in the tree line on the one stretch of highway where we happened to glance down at the radio? The record only captures the moments when the timing fails them. Everything else is invisible. I personally think the predator call is the key that unlocks this entire case. A wounded animal call is a dinner bell for everything with teeth in those woods. If something large, fast, and intelligent answered that call expecting an easy meal and instead found a human with a flashlight that would explain everything that followed. The stalking, the pacing, the refusal to simply leave. He didn't wander into its territory. He rang the doorbell. Whatever lives in those Center County hollows, it did not follow that student out of idle curiosity. And in May of this year, 2,000 miles to the west, 10 teenagers found out what it feels like when the watching surrounds an entire camp. Part 2. 4 Nights in the Payette. Memorial Day weekend, 2026. May 22nd through May 25th. 10 friends from the small farming town of Parma, Idaho, drive up into the Payette National Forest and make camp near Lost Valley Road in Adams County. This is genuinely remote country, and they knew it. They told investigators afterward that they were miles from the nearest other camper. 10 witnesses. Keep that number in your head because the loudest skeptical argument against every case in this genre is the same. One person, bad light, overactive imagination. This is 10 people. And before the weekend was over, 4 of them had seen it. Understand what the Payette is. Over 2 million acres of central Idaho timber, canyons, and snow-fed creeks, running up against the Frank Church Wilderness, one of the largest roadless areas in the lower 48. Western Idaho's mountain counties have produced a quiet, steady trickle of reports for decades, the kind that never make the news because there is rarely anyone around to tell. When 10 witnesses drop into country like that on a holiday weekend, they aren't entering empty land. They're entering land where the question has been open for a very long time. Friday night, the first night, one of the girls steps away from the fire and freezes. A tall, dark figure is standing a few yards behind one of the tents. Not approaching, not retreating, just standing there in the trees at the edge of the firelight, watching the camp. And here's the detail that gets under my skin more than the figure itself. She said nothing. She didn't want to terrify her friends, so she carried it alone, climbed into her tent, and went to sleep that night, knowing something enormous had been standing close enough to touch the fabric. I honestly can't decide whether that's the bravest thing in the story or the most chilling. One teenager, lying awake in the dark, listening to the forest, while 9 friends sleep around her with no idea what's standing watch outside. Saturday and Sunday, the forest starts talking. Several of the group report sounds with no visible source, movement in the timber, snapping, the shifting of real weight, always close, never showing itself. At one point, one of the girls goes looking for a friend who has wandered a short way from camp, and something tracks her through the trees as she searches, moving alongside her, matching her pace, never letting her see it. The same behavior as the Pennsylvania student. The same behavior we'll see one more time before this video is over. Picture that scene from her side of it. You're calling a friend's name into the timber, and every time you take 10 steps, something heavy takes 10 steps with you, close enough to hear, positioned exactly where the trees are thickest. She wasn't lost. She wasn't alone in the dark. She was in the middle of a group campsite on a holiday weekend, and something still chose to shadow her. That detail, more than the 9-foot figure itself, tells you these animals were not passing by. They were managing the camp, keeping track of where every human was. Then comes the clearest look of the weekend. One witness describes a figure roughly 9 feet tall, walking on 2 legs, with what the report records as blank, reflective eyes catching the light and giving nothing back. 9 feet. That is half again the height of an NBA center, standing in the trees on the edge of a teenager's campsite in the dark. And in true teenager fashion, several of the group grabbed lights and went into the woods to investigate. Mercifully, the woods chose not to answer. By the end of the weekend, 4 of the 10 reported visual sightings, and most of the rest backed up the sounds. They filed a report with the BFRO and the organization's founder, Matt Moneymaker, a man who has spent 3 decades filtering hoaxes and misidentifications out of this database, interviewed members of the group directly. His conclusion was blunt. The teens were telling the truth. The only question he left open was whether they had misread what they saw. And given the long history of that region and 4 independent visual accounts, his follow-up leaned hard toward a conclusion that should stop you cold. Multiple animals, at least 3, were likely around that camp all weekend. Multiple, circling a camp full of kids for 3 nights. Let that one sit for a second. A small personal aside here, I've camped in country like the Payette, and I can promise you that one unexplained noise is enough to ruin a night's sleep out there. These kids had 3 nights of it, and they still held together well enough to give investigators consistent, separate, sober accounts. Whatever you believe about this subject, that is a remarkably disciplined group of witnesses. Better than most adults, frankly. And the comment section under our recent videos keeps proving a point I've come to trust. The witnesses who scare you the most are always the ones who never wanted the attention. But being watched is one thing. The next case is what happens when the watching stops being passive, when something in the dark decides to send a message. Part 3. The Stones at 3:30. Southern California, the slopes of Mount Baldy, properly Mount San Antonio, the rooftop of the San Gabriel Mountains, barely an hour's drive from downtown Los Angeles. A mother heads up the mountain in the dark with her son and his cousins for a camping trip. They arrive to find the campground nearly deserted, 2 occupied sites in the entire place. The boys pick the flattest ground they can find, clear away the loose rocks and stones before pitching the tent. Remember that? They cleared the rocks, build a fire, and let the coyotes sing them towards sleep. And the coyotes actually came down into the campground that night, bold enough and close enough that the group set off a car alarm to push them back into the trees. So this is already an eventful night in the mountains. Eventually, everyone settles. And at 3:30 in the morning, the mother snaps awake to a sound her brain cannot file. Rocks. 10 to 15 of them, arriving one after another, thrown from somewhere out in the dark, striking the ground and rolling toward the tent, toward one specific side of the tent, the side where their heads were. She lay absolutely still and worked through the possibilities the way any rational adult would. A rock slide? No, the stones were arriving in a controlled rhythm, spaced apart, landing and rolling, not cascading in a rush. Something walking the slope above them, kicking stones loose? The pattern was wrong for that too. These were thrown, from distance, with force. And here's the part that moves this from frightening to deliberate. Out of 10 to 15 substantial rocks, landing again and again on the side of the tent, where 3 sleeping kids' heads lay, not one of them ever touched the tent. Every single stone landed short, close enough to hear, close enough to feel through the ground, never close enough to hurt anyone, That is not geology, that is AIM. The family reported the incident, and it was taken seriously enough to go under review for classification as a genuine encounter. And think about where this happened. Not the Olympic rainforest, not some unnamed drainage in British Columbia. Mount Baldy stares down at the Los Angeles basin. On a clear day, you can see the skyline from its ridges, and on summer weekends, its trailheads overflow with day hikers. We are talking about reported warning behavior on the doorstep of 15 million people. If even a fraction of this record is what it appears to be, the most unsettling conclusion isn't that these animals live in the deep wilderness, it's that the deep wilderness was never a requirement. I personally think this case matters more than any blurry photograph 2026 has produced. And here's why. Rock throwing that deliberately misses is one of the most consistent behaviors in the entire 100-year record of these reports. The behavior is the fingerprint. A hoaxer can fake what Bigfoot looks like. Almost nobody thinks to fake what Bigfoot does. Part 4, why they throw. So let's talk about that behavior, because the stones at Mount Baldy are not an isolated oddity. They are one data point in a pattern with decades of paper trail behind it. And understanding that pattern is the lens for every case in this video. Matt Moneymaker, the same investigator from the Idaho case, has laid it out plainly over the years. These animals avoid people. That is their entire survival strategy. But when one is surprised at close range or feels cornered or wants humans out of a specific area, it escalates. And the first stage of escalation, reported over and over across the continent, is thrown objects. Sticks, stones, warning shots, launched from cover, engineered to frighten rather than wound. The thrown stone is only one rung on a ladder that witnesses describe with eerie consistency. It usually starts quieter, the wood knock, a single sharp crack of wood on wood. The sound the Penn State student heard before the pacing began, the sound reported from Ohio to Oregon, often answered by a second knock from a different direction. Researchers have long suspected its communication, a position call or a warning passed between animals that humans have entered the area. Then comes the pacing, then the stones, and only at the very top of the ladder, rarely, but it's in the record, comes the charge. At Salt Fork State Park in Ohio, a park so saturated with reports that it hosts an annual Bigfoot conference, 2 fishermen out on the lake described rocks the size of melons heaved at them with stunning force. Families camping in the same park have reported sticks raining out of the tree line with no thrower anywhere in sight. Mark Deworth, the Ohio researcher who organizes the Salt Fork Conference, has personally interviewed more than 300 witnesses over the years, and the thrown object reports just keep surfacing. Different decades, different families, same behavior. Pennsylvania has a fresh one of its own. In a report collected by the BFRO, a night shift worker tending a portable generator at a remote job site heard footsteps in the leaves, 2-legged footsteps, pacing back and forth in the woods just beyond his truck. Then, out of the darkness, a sudden deafening bang off the steel fuel tank. Something had thrown a rock, hard and connected. And then the footsteps started again. Closer, whatever was out there wasn't fleeing the noise it had just made, it was walking toward it. And sometimes the warning stops being a warning. Moneymaker tells of an incident at Berlin Lake in northeast Ohio where he watched a companion get charged. A full, aggressive rush that closed to within 20 feet of his friend, accompanied by sounds he describes as openly hostile. 20 feet. That is the distance from your couch to your kitchen. Researcher Suzanne Ferencak, the woman who recorded the famous Ohio Howl, has described nighttime activity on her own front porch that she called far too close for comfort. These are the people who study this subject most closely, telling you the same thing the frightened campers tell you. If this pattern is ringing a very old bell for longtime viewers, it should. This is Ape Canyon, the 1924 case in which miners on the flank of Mount St. Helens spent an entire night under bombardment, stones hammering the walls and roof of their cabin until first light. That story is over a century old. It is one of the foundation legends of this entire subject. And I'll tell you now, it is getting its own full video on this channel because what happened in that canyon deserves far more than a paragraph. And it echoes something we covered only a few weeks ago, the 4 U.S. Army soldiers in Oregon's Coast Range who watched 3 of these creatures calmly observing a live demolitions exercise. Not fleeing the explosions, watching them. Whatever these animals are, the record keeps describing the same profile: intelligence, restraint, and a very precise sense of boundaries, right up until a boundary is crossed. That's the lens I want you carrying into the back half of this video. Don't ask whether each witness saw a monster, ask where each encounter sat on that ladder. A figure crossing a road is the bottom rung. Observed, incidental, over. A creature pacing a camp is higher, deliberate, sustained, controlled. Stones around a tent at 3:30 in the morning are higher still. Contact on its terms. Every case left in this video sits somewhere on that ladder. And the pattern of 2026, the thing that has researchers reaching for the word acceleration, is simple and uncomfortable. The rungs are filling up from the top. Before we head into the Louisiana swamps, if you're finding value in cases tied to documented reports instead of recycled campfire stories, do me one favor, subscribe and drop a comment telling me which of tonight's cases unsettles you the most. The comments genuinely steer this channel. Half the cases in this video first cross my desk because viewers flag them. You are quite literally my field network. Part 5, The Swamp in the Pass, April 14th, 2026. Westlake, Louisiana, Calcasieu Parish, refinery country, about half a mile from the Houston River and the West Fork of the Calcasieu. 8 o'clock in the evening, the light just beginning to soften. A woman doing yard work walks down the slope into the woods behind her house. And the woods detonate. Something enormous tears away from her through the brush, not the bounding, weightless flight of a startled deer, but a heavy, crashing, 2-legged retreat that carries it through the trees and clean across a canal. She saw enough. Upright, tall, black or dark brown hair covering its body. Daylight conditions, close range, a clear look. The BFRO logged it as Class A, their highest confidence tier, reserved for sightings where the conditions essentially rule out mistaken identity. Moneymaker followed up with her by phone, and his credibility note is worth repeating. She is a longtime corporate-level employee at Citgo, a grounded professional with absolutely nothing to gain and a reputation to lose. But here's the detail from her report that I find genuinely eerie. In the days before the encounter, the pets around her neighborhood had been behaving strangely. Restless, off, wrong. The animals knew before any human did, which means whatever she startled in those trees that evening had not just arrived. It had been living there, close to the houses, close to the yards, for days at the very least. And not one person noticed. Moneymaker's theory for why these creatures favor that swamp country runs on cold, simple logic. Deer. A deer fleeing through waist-deep water slows to a struggling crawl. A tall biped wading in after it barely slows at all. Flooded timber turns the deer's single greatest advantage, speed, into a death sentence. If you sat down to design the perfect hunting ground for a giant upright predator, you would design Southwest Louisiana, and Louisiana's woods were whispering about something like this long before the BFRO existed. The bottomland south has its own deep tradition of wild, hair-covered men in the swamps, stories passed down in communities along these same rivers for generations. People hear Bigfoot and picture Pacific Northwest fog and Douglas firs. But the reports have never respected that postcard. They follow water, timber, and deer, and by that measure, the drainages of the Calcasieu are exactly where the record says they should be. The woman in Westlake didn't see something out of place. She may have seen something that was home. 1 month later, and 2,000 miles to the northwest, came the most symbolically loaded report of the year so far. May 2026, Skamania County, Washington. If you know the subject at all, you know that name. Skamania is the county that passed an ordinance back in 1969 making it a crime to kill a Sasquatch, a local government that put the creature into law more than half a century before the rest of the country was ready to say the word out loud. Washington leads the nation in reports, but it had gone strangely quiet. Now it's back on the board, and that 1969 ordinance wasn't a tourism gag. It was passed during a winter of intense local sightings, when armed search parties were heading into the hills, and county officials grew genuinely worried someone was going to shoot a creature or a person in the dark. The county sits in the shadow of Mount St. Helens in the same drainage country as Ape Canyon itself. This is Ground Zero, the oldest haunted ground in the entire Sasquatch story. So when a fresh Class A report comes out of Skamania County after years of quiet, longtime researchers don't treat it as just another pin on the map. They treat it the way coastal towns treat a receding tide. A lone driver reported a large, two-legged creature standing among debris at the roadside. The case was logged as BFRO report number 80159, Class A again. The witness made the point that investigators hear constantly from their most credible reporters. He wasn't looking for anything unusual that day. In his own words, this was the only explanation for what I saw. And then there's the one detail in this report I cannot shake. There was a jogger on that same road, roughly 100 feet from the creature, running past it, apparently never seeing it at all. 2 people, 1 road, one of them saw a monster, and the other saw a Tuesday. I personally think that single detail explains more about this entire mystery than any laboratory result ever has. These things are seen only when they allow it, or when, for just a moment, they miscalculate. Part 6. The pattern. Now pull back and look at the map, because this is where the video earns its title. February 2026. Oklahoma, where 3 witnesses watched a dark, upright figure walk off a power line easement from 1,500 feet away across a river in the wind, and still distinct enough that all 3 agreed on exactly what they were seeing. March 2026, the Ohio flapped. 8 reports in 5 days, clustered around Portage County along the Mahoning River. We made a full video on that wave when it broke, and if you haven't watched it, it pairs with this one like a lock and key. April, Louisiana. May, Skamania County and the Payette Camp in Idaho. June, investigators are still processing what's coming in. Remember the shape of that Ohio wave because it's the strangest part. Mantua, Garrettsville, Streetsboro, Newton Township. Witness after witness in a tight cluster, describing figures up to 8 feet tall moving through the woods, dogs reacting with raw fear, activity on a scale that region hadn't documented since the 1970s. And then it stopped, cleanly. Researchers tracking the reports noted the activity seemed to drift east in mid-March. One last report of a dog fixating on a shadow at a woodline. And then nothing. 5 days of noise and months of silence since. Like something moved through Portage County and kept moving. And let me give the skeptics their honest due here, because this channel doesn't hide from the counter-argument. Flaps feed on themselves. One publicized report makes the next witness braver, and some of what floods in afterward is misidentified bears, pranks, and wishful thinking. The researchers say so themselves. Jeremiah Byron, who collected and mapped the Ohio wave, was filtering out obvious fakes as fast as they arrived. Publicity can absolutely manufacture a wave. That thread is real, and you should hold on to it. But publicity cannot explain the Pennsylvania engineer who filed his report months before any of this reached the news. A man who never believed in Bigfoot until one glided across an interstate in front of his truck. It cannot explain a teenage girl in Idaho who told no one what she saw standing behind the tents. It cannot explain pets in a Louisiana neighborhood acting wrong for days before a single human knew anything was out there. The witnesses at the heart of these cases were not riding a wave. The wave formed around them. Some of you will remember the video from earlier this year, the longtime contact of mine who spent years quietly documenting these animals in the mountains, who watched their behavior grow bolder season after season, who told me he was finally going to find where they sheltered, and who then went silent. I bring him up tonight for one reason. His last messages to me said exactly what this map is now saying. The behavior is changing. The distances are shrinking. The fear of us is thinning. I personally think we are watching something shift in 2026. Maybe it's weather pushing animals along new routes. That's the mundane thread, and it may well be part of the truth. But the cases in this video are not glimpses at a distance. They are a creature pacing a student in the dark, step for step. Stones placed, not thrown wild, placed around sleeping children. Something living unnoticed among houses for days. That is not an animal wandering. That is an animal deciding how close it is willing to come. And one last report for atmosphere, because it has stayed with me. Monroe, Connecticut, a BFRO case from a known hotspot in Fairfield County. Just after midnight, a resident listened to screaming, whooping vocalizations roll out of the forest for the better part of 10 minutes, power behind them carrying over distance, rising and falling in a pattern. When it finally stopped, every dog in the area erupted at once, and the owls that called from those woods every single night, went silent. For 10 full minutes after the voice stopped, the forest held its breath. Whatever made that sound, the wild things of Connecticut already knew to fear it. So where does all of this leave us? It leaves me, honestly, with a retired engineer standing at a red light in Pennsylvania, watching the only other witnesses to the strangest moment of his life accelerate away rather than speak about it. I think about those people in the Subaru more than anything else in tonight's cases. They saw it closer than anyone. They have never said a word. Somewhere out there, right now, 2 people are carrying a memory they refuse to share, and I would give a great deal to know whether it's embarrassment keeping them quiet, or whether they saw a detail up close through that windshield that the rest of us are better off not knowing. The reports keep arriving. As I record this, the Idaho investigation is days old. The summer camping season is only beginning. Millions of people are about to walk into the woods of this continent, and if the first 5 months of 2026 are any indication, those woods are going to have more to say before the year is out. And here's the thought I'll leave you with. Every case tonight had a moment, a single hinge, where it could have gone further. The face at 40 yards could have closed the distance. The figure behind the tents could have stepped into the firelight. The stones at Mount Baldy could have been thrown 3 feet longer. None of them did. Every single one of these encounters ended because something on the other side decided it was over. We call these the encounters that went wrong. But if the record is telling the truth, the unsettling reality is the opposite. These are the ones that went exactly the way the creature intended. The encounters that truly go wrong may be the ones nobody comes back to report. We're building toward a full breakdown of these behavioral patterns, the pacing, the stones, the boldness curve, in an upcoming video, because I believe the behavior, not the blurry photographs, is where the answer to this entire mystery is hiding. Until then, watch the tree line, mind the silence when the owls stop. And if a rock ever rolls up against your tent at 3:30 in the morning, remember what the record says: it missed because it was meant to. I'm Alex, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.